Thank you all for being here. Last June, Ethan and myself and 28 other legislators in this state formed a coalition called Legislators for Ending the War. We're the first and only coalition of legislators that have stood up and said that we think that the war in Iraq should come to an end. First in the country and the only group of legislators in the country that have said that. The reason that we said that was that last year, Maine lost $40 million in transportation funding, $40 million in Medicaid, and $17 million in Homeland Security to support the war in Iraq. $1.2 billion of Maine taxpayer money has gone to support the war in Iraq. $450 billion has been spent on the war in Iraq by the end of this year. Those expenditures have robbed us of the opportunity to invest in this state in healthcare, education, transportation, and the environment. It has robbed us of our opportunity to invest in our children's future. Paul Wellstone, the late senator from Minnesota, said, "Politics is not about being left, right, or center. It is about doing right by people." And in the last 6 years, there's not been much in this country that's been doing right by people, in particular children. Before we leave here today, 4 people in this country will die simply because they don't have health insurance. Every half hour in this country, somebody dies because they don't have health insurance. Even worse, there was a study that was just released that showed that children who don't have health insurance, that go to hospitals, die at a higher rate than children that do have insurance. So simply by the fact that you go to a hospital, and if you're a child and you don't have insurance, your chances of dying are greater than the child right next to you that has insurance. And I want to ask you, is that doing right by people and children in this country? No, I don't think so. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, one of the largest healthcare foundations in this country, just dedicated $500 million of their resources for children's health, because they believe that the next generation of children will be less healthy and will die at an earlier age than this generation. So they've contributed $500 million to move us in another direction on children's health care. Poverty in this country has been increasing. By the simple fact of graduating from high school, people reduce their chances of being in poverty by 50%, just by graduating from high school. We should make sure that every child in this country graduates from high school in order to reduce poverty. Yet the response in the last 6 years from the federal government has been to reduce funding for education, not to increase funding for education. Is that doing right by children? Lastly, global warming. By 2050, if nothing changes, by 2050, and the temperature of the Earth increases by 3.5 degrees, there will be over 2 billion people, almost a third of the people on this planet, that will have a shortage of water. 2 billion people, 3 degrees, shortage of water. That's the legacy that we're creating for our children, because we're investing our resources, our future, in a war that, as the previous speakers have pointed out, have led to more violence rather than a reduction in violence. I want to make 2 other quick points, and this is something that more recently came to my attention, but I thought it was apropos to talk about today, talking about children. There's recently an article in the New York Times. There are 200,000 children in this country that are in prison, that are under 18, that were tried as adults. 200,000. One that was cited in a report that he was tried, brought back to by a probation of violence for stealing a bicycle, and is now serving time in an adult prison. 200,000. The report goes on to say that it's now clear that children that spend time in adult prisons go on to live more violent lives and have a much more difficult life in front of them. So I would ask each and every one of you today to think about the fact that we have 200,000 children in prison across this country, and disproportionately there are children of color. And the expectation is that when they get out of prison, return to the community, that they'll be more violent and have a more difficult life than they currently have. Last week, I had the opportunity to have lunch at the Blaine House in Augusta with Victoria Rowell. Does anybody know who Victoria Rowell is? There you go. You're right. She's an actress on Diagnosed Murder and on The Young and the Restless, and she recently starred in a movie called The Home of the Brave. She was born in Mercy Hospital right up the street here. And she immediately became a ward of the state. And she grew up in foster care. At 18 years old, she went to New York. She was a dancer. And then in her early 30s, she went to Hollywood and became a movie star. And she recently came back to Maine because she just wrote a book about her life growing up in Maine and growing up in foster care. And the book is all about the woman who raised her. And she talks about the fact that from the time that she was in foster care, there was always a woman in her life that made a critical difference and that allowed her to be successful and that allowed her to go on and become a star in Hollywood. And there are 5 different women that she profiles in that book and that she pays a huge amount of respect to because of the difference that they made in her life. She has now created a foundation, the Victoria Rowell Foundation, and what that foundation does is provide scholarships for children who are in foster care that want to go forward into the performing arts. But one of the things in listening to Victoria last week that was so profound and so apropos today was that what she talked about and what each one of us need to be able to do is to make sure that every child in this country, every child in this state, every child in this community has an adult that on a regular basis says to them, we care that you're here, we love you, and we will stand with you. And we have in this state over 2,500 children that are in foster care. There are over 500,000 children in the country that are in foster care that need an adult to stand with them to say we're glad that you're here and say that we love you. Lastly, the reason I'm so happy to be here is because the key to ending the war in Iraq, the key to getting universal health care, the key to making sure that everybody has education, and the key to ending global warming is sitting right here today. And each and every one of us has an opportunity, along with Helen, to start acting up with mothers and with fathers and with everybody in the community, having events like we have today, to make sure that when we walk away today, that we take the spirit of mothers and acting up, and that we all act up, and we continue to act up until we end the war in Iraq and until we have universal health care. Thank you very much.